The Dogman, by One Stone Boy. This story takes place in 2007 when I was a 9-year-old kid. I live in Michigan and it was the summer before I started 3rd grade. It was a tradition for my dad and I to go up north and stay a weekend visiting his buddy who had a cabin on the lake, and this year was no different. I was excited as I always was, but this time I was particularly happy that my dad's wife and her kids weren't gonna be with us. The driveway to the cabin was a long dirt road, with a smaller cabin and fireplace near the front. It's also surrounded by a thick woods that stretches along both sides of the driveway, which extends about 100 yards until it opens up into the spot where people park their cars. Just beyond the cars was the bunkhouse, and beyond the bunkhouse was the front yard to the cabin. As we pulled in, my father reminded us that we would have to camp out in the front yard and sleep in a tent together because the bunkhouse was already being occupied by his friend's kids. I didn't mind at all, as the sounds of nature helped me fall asleep. The sun was setting as we unloaded the truck, and the leaves swayed with the breeze. The branches danced and cast shadows along the yard that occasionally changed when the sun dipped behind the clouds. The entire property was surrounded by woods and enclosed within a chain-link fence, with the front yard having a gate that opened up onto the deck. Once you were on the deck, there was a table and grill to your left and a doorway to the cabin on your right. If you kept going, you'd go down 4 steps and come across the hot tub on the left and another doorway on the right, followed by the rickety wooden stairway that led down to the lake. After we said hi to everyone, my dad and I started pitching our tent. I glanced to the right and noticed there was a small clearing about 50 yards out in the woods. I didn't pay much attention to it, and we finished setting up the tent in no time. We then proceeded to join everyone for dinner on the deck, followed by a fire down by the lake. After a few hours of making s'mores, listening to everyone tell ghost stories, and watching some fireworks that were set off on the dock, I found myself exhausted from the trip and started saying goodnight to everyone. I gave my dad a hug goodnight and started heading up to the deck and out to the front yard. I unzipped the tent, crawled into my sleeping bag, and passed out. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but I could hear my dad snoring lightly next to me, so I assumed it was well into the night. One thing I picked up on right away was that it was dead quiet outside. Instead of hearing the normal summer sounds that I'm used to hearing at night, there was nothing. There were no crickets chirping, no owls hooting, not even the rustling of the leaves or twigs rustling as the nocturnal creatures came out for food. It was dead silent. I felt extremely uneasy, but I also realized why I had woken up. I had to pee. I slowly crawled to the front of the tent and reached for the zipper, hesitating for a moment before unzipping the door. I poked my head out and was met with the eeriest silence I've ever heard. The moon was full and illuminated the trees and their branches as they sat above me silently. The sky was clear and the stars twinkled as they danced in the darkness. I slowly stepped out of the tent and felt the morning dew from the grass hit the bottom of my feet. I glanced up at the sky, just in awe at how clear it was. We never got to see the stars this bright back in the city, and I liked to cherish the moments when I could. I walked over to the big oak tree that was just inside the fence and started doing my business. I lowered my head to the clearing in front of me, and that's when I heard it. The sound pierced through the silent night. Chills ran down my spine and I froze in place as my head darted in the direction of the woods, trying to locate the source of the sound. It happened again. This time it was echoed by a few more. What followed were the familiar yips of coyotes, and I was relieved when I saw them emerge from one side of the clearing and exit into the other. I stood there quietly as I observed the canines running and jumping through the clearing. When the last of them had disappeared, I tapped out the last of my business and glanced down to zip up my shorts. When I looked back up, I saw something I will never forget. There, in the clearing 50 yards away, was what looked like a coyote mixed with a human, and it was standing on its hind legs, looking right at me. It had pointy ears, thick dark fur, a snout that was snarling and revealing a set of wicked teeth, and its eyes were yellow-orange, staring straight into mine. The thing that terrified me most about this thing was its size. If I had to guess, it had to have stood around 8 feet tall. I was frozen stiff, but that quickly changed when the thing looked up and let out the most horrific scream I've ever heard. Nothing about it sounded human. I tripped backwards over my feet and dashed back into the tent, zipping it shut and diving under my sleeping bag. I then heard the grunt of a large animal, followed by the rattling of the chain-link fence, and then the unmistakable sound of feet hitting the earth. I closed my eyes shut tight and hoped to God this thing would go away. I laid there, trembling in my sleeping bag as I heard a set of 2 feet slowly stomp around our tent. After a few minutes, I pulled my sleeping bag slightly down below my eyes, and I saw its shadow in front of the tent. Its pointy ears tilted back as it let out another scream, before running towards the driveway of the cabin and disappearing into the night. I laid there in my sleeping bag, paralyzed by fear, hoping it wouldn't come back. After what seemed like forever, the sun finally came up. I asked my dad if he heard the screams last night and told him about what I saw, but he assured me it was just a nightmare and that no such thing existed. I dropped it shortly after and kept this story mostly to myself until now. I don't know what it was for sure that I saw that night, but I did see it, and I do know this: I will never set foot near the Michigan woods alone at night ever again. Wisconsin Wolfman, by Trigger 1154. I posted an earlier version of this more than a year ago. My mind was racing on my first write-up here and my interview with Dogman encounters here. I have now summed it up below with better thought-out information. I believe some parts are more accurate. Sighting was roughly at these coordinates: 45.983538, minus 92.359649, SE of our cabin. I think I wrote the first story when I was kinda dazed and accidentally gave a wrong direction. I'm fairly certain I may have seen a cryptid in NW, Wisconsin. Very wolf-like, and it definitely was not a bear, as well as I'm pretty sure wolves don't run upright. So I was 16 or 17, it was midsummer, we were at our cabin in NW, Wisconsin. I was with my cousin and grandparents for the weekend. I brought my airsoft gear. So me and my cousin are in mid-airsoft battle and I took it more seriously than him. I was decked out in full BDU woodland camo, including the shemagh. I retreated into the forest for better tactical advantage. So the way our land was set up is there is a trail that cuts around the border of the almost acre of owned forest. Our skirmish took us about 200 meters into the woods going up the right trail. So I'm a huge outdoorsman. I was introduced to hunting and survival training as well as firearms at a young age. I also had been practicing MMA for a few years at that point. The point is I'm not easily scared, and I'm comfortable in the wild. Now I'm 25 and now I have even more training. I respect the wild a lot more now. I was cocky back then. Anyway, here is where things get strange. Our battle had ended and we were standing at the edge of a slightly clearer area of forest and just talking. On the other side of the clearing is a hill that goes down to a small pond. Animals are a common sight around there as it's a watering hole. Now, as any experienced outdoorsman will know, most small animals will go about their business even when humans are around. Birds will still chirp and whatnot, but when a big predator is around, the forest goes dead quiet. So me and my cousin and talking, and I decided to freak him out, so I shushed him and whispered, "We're being watched." He got quiet. Then I realized that it was dead quiet. Not even birds chirping anymore. Then I got that feeling. You know when you feel like you are being watched and when you feel it you are. I went into hunter mode at this point and started scanning the clearing. I went from right to left then back. On the second look through I saw it. Its teeth are what gave it away as they contrasted with the background. Once I focused on it I noticed a canid appearance in the head. It had dark reddish-brown hair fur. Where it gets even stranger is it was leaning on a tree and had its front left arm gripping the tree. It appeared to have claws, and it was panting and staring in our direction with its ears up listening, while kneeling or crouching. I recognized it as a threat. as a predator immediately. Now this all happened in the span of maybe 10 seconds before I said to my cousin, "We have to go," and he was a faster runner than me. When I said that I was still watching the animal, my cousin took off when he ran. The animal raised up and ran towards us and took a good 3 steps on 2 legs. Before I started to run, as I was turning to run, it appeared have possibly been going to all 4s. I got to the fork in the trail to find my cousin waiting. I yelled, "Go, go, 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 go," and we ran back to the cabin. While running out, I could hear it crashing through the woods behind me, but it didn't follow beyond the tree line. At the time I thought it had the intention to do harm, but now that I look back on it, I think it was just being either territorial or it was a bluff charge, because most animals can easily outrun humans on foot. If it really wanted one of us, it would have got us. I have tried to explain it away as being a bear or a big wolf, but what I saw just does not add up in being a known animal. I'm still stumped by it. I was recently added to a group of people who have had sightings with similar sightings. They say mine falls in line with other sightings. They believe it to be a dogman, which I think is the cheesiest name they could have chosen, but I admit that what I saw is very similar, if not the same, as what others have claimed to see. I have different theories regarding the creature though. I am normally very skeptical. However, I know that what I saw was not normal, and I am less skeptical than I used to be now. I wrote up this encounter before. In the past write-up I was unclear with some details. Here is the old one. I am still nervous about the forests. I don't go into the woods alone or unarmed anymore. I'm not scared of any man, but I certainly don't want to see anything that looks like a werewolf again. By the way, all of this happened in broad daylight if it wasn't clear. I will answer questions to clarify things. The Michigan Dogman by Frost Breer. I've always been fascinated by urban legends and tales of supernatural creatures. I've heard of the Dogman since I was young. When I first heard the legend played on the radio, a mysterious creature said to roam the forests of the Great Lakes region, and with my fascination came a sense of wanting to find the creature and to see for myself if it was really out there. Armed with a curious mind and a flashlight, I set out to explore the woods near my hometown. It was an overcast night, with only the dim glow of the stars to guide my path. As I ventured deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig sent shivers down my spine. But I pressed on, my curiosity overpowering my unease. Little did I know how much of a mistake it was to ignore my instincts. After what felt like hours of wandering, I stumbled forward. An eerie silence blanketed the forest, as if a switch was flipped and all the sound in the world disappeared. Something drew me toward it, an invisible force urging me to step closer. That's when I surveyed my surroundings in detail and saw it, a pair of glowing amber eyes staring back at me from the shadows. My heart skipped a beat as the creature revealed itself, a massive canine-like figure, standing upright on 2 legs. Its fur was matted and dark, and its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. It was a dogman, and it had fixed its gaze upon me. A primal fear surged through my veins and I stumbled back, dropping my flashlight in the process, and with but a moment's hesitation, I turned and ran as fast as my legs could carry me. The sound of heavy footsteps pounded behind me, growing louder and closer with each passing second. I could hear its snarls and the sharp snapping of its jaws, hungry for the chase. My breath grew ragged, and my muscles screamed in protest, but the adrenaline fueled my desperate sprint. Branches whipped against my face, and the forest floor seemed to rise up to trip me. But I pushed through, determined to escape the clutches of the monstrous dogman. My lungs burned, and my vision blurred as I reached the edge of the woods. My house stood just a few yards away, its lights providing a beacon of hope. Summoning the last reserves of my strength, I sprinted across the yard and flung open the front door. I slammed it shut, panting heavily as I leaned against it, my heart racing in my chest. I felt a mixture of relief and terror as I looked through the window and saw the dogman standing at the edge of the clearing, its gaze fixed upon me. Its mouth curled into a wicked snarl, revealing sharp, glistening teeth, in what looked like a cruel and deranged smile. For a moment, we locked eyes, a battle of wills between human and beast. I knew that I had escaped, but the encounter had left an indelible mark on my soul. The dogman had shown me the darkness lurking just beyond the realm of our understanding, and it was a sight I would never forget. To this day, I am plagued by the memory of that night. The image of the dogman's glowing eyes and sinister grin haunts my dreams, a constant reminder of the terrors that exist in the shadows. I warn anyone who dares to venture into the Michigan wilderness, beware the dogman's domain. It may be an urban legend to some, but for those who have encountered its malevolence, it is all too real. The forest hides its secrets well, and the dogman waits patiently for its next victim. Ever since then I haven't been able to look at the woods without a shudder going down my spine, hoping to not see the amber eyes staring back at me. If I were to give you all any advice, it would be, do not go out at night. Dogman encounter during camping trip, by unknown Reddit user. Hello, my name is Shaggy Satyr, but you can call me Shaggy for short. I'm going to recant a story of mine that I tell rarely. My own family don't even know about this, and while that might sound weird to you, trust me, it makes more sense to tell internet strangers than the people I'm forced to be around. Mr. X Dreams, an amazing narrator, once read this story for his channel, and I'm happy with the discussion it got. But I believe it's time to rewrite the story to clear up confusions. So without further explanation, let me get into my story. This happened when I was much younger. I'd have to ask my parents when the camping trip happened to tell you how many years ago it was, but I can assure you it was at least a decade. Now I'm going to use some questionable words for describing the location. Words like wooded and wilderness reserve, because I don't know the best words for this thing. Around a decade ago, a friend from church asked me to join his family on a camping trip to a wilderness reserve called Oasis State Park. Of course, since this was my best friend and his family had always been nice, I said yes. Up until that point I had only camped rarely, so the prospect of camping with a friend and his family seemed absolutely amazing. So we began preparing for a weekend when I wasn't busy. I got my own tent, my own sleeping bag, and my own supplies. Once all that was gathered, the father of the friend came and picked me up and my parents waved me off. There are quite a few things I remember from that trip. The amazingly hostile yet beautiful New Mexico countryside, the plateaus, and the campsite. The New Mexican wilderness isn't something a lot of people fantasize about camping in, at least not so far as I know. But Oasis State Park is different. The camping plots are all nice even if the best are always taken. There's a pretty lake, lots of wildlife, and I hate to admit, more trees than I've ever seen in town. Yeah, I know nobody thinks of multitudes of trees when they think of New Mexico, and for good reason. They aren't the most common occurrence in the plains unless planted by people. Regardless, Oasis has enough for me to just use the term woods for the sake of brevity. So anyways, we found ourselves a plot and began setting up our tents. By afternoon the tents were set and me and my friend ditched his, oh so boring, younger sister in favor of exploring the park. The memories are fantastic. We found a snake by the lake and watched it drink from the water before slithering off quickly. We explored a place I remember was very sandy. We watched a roadrunner doing its thing. We played all day after lunch and saw so many amazing things that by the end of the day I never would have thought anything could go wrong. We finished the day like you always do, by collecting sticks and starting a fire to eat s'mores and tell ghost stories. None of the stories were scary, probably because me and my friend were kids and his sister was an even younger child, that and his father was lead singer at our church and making children cry was bad for reputation. So by ghost stories I mean little jokes of stories designed to make us giggle more than cry. Yeah, it was lame, but what do you expect? Anyways, shortly after the stories were said and s'mores were eaten, we retired, me to my tent and my friend, his father, and his sister to their tent. Now for this setup I'll explain positioning. This is all going to be important. My tent was at one edge of the plot and my friend's tent was at the exact opposite. This was for privacy reasons. Now at my end of the plot was a mini trail that led through thick brush to the lake. Also about 3 feet from my tent was a little tree. IDK what kind of tree it was, but it was still young and small. The trail to the lake was to the left of my tent entrance, the lake was behind it, and a thin tree line sat across a trail in front of my tent. That trail in front of my tent led to the bathrooms. So I went to bed without a single bit of fear, and before I did I went ahead and urinated on the tree outside my tent because of laziness. Screw the 2-minute walk to the bathrooms when nature's toilet was outside my tent. So I finished closing up my tent for the night and climbed into my sleeping bag to go to bed. I don't know how long I slept, but when I woke I had to use the bathroom, and it wasn't the kind of pottying I could do on a tree, or at least not reasonably. So I, not being a moron who'd wander through the dark, grabbed my little lantern. I flipped on my LED lantern and I unzipped the inner flap of my tent before the outer. As if that little nylon net could protect me from what I was about to see. Now I should mention that outside of cities in New Mexico, it's quite common to hear coyote howls. It's a nightly occurrence when camping. Heck, even up in a little village like Logan you can hear the howls from your bedroom. It isn't so unnerving when you're in a house. But when you got some flimsy nylon walls to protect you and that's it, well, it isn't the most comforting sound. As I unzipped my tent flap I did hear a few howls, but they were distant and not worrying. What stunned me into stillness was a very loud howl from the direction of the lake, about a yard from my tent at most. This howl was different though. It had the feel of a coyote howl, but it was deeper, and it lasted longer. I simply sat there petrified at what I heard. I wouldn't be able to guess at how long I sat there breathing hard with my fingers still grasping the zipper. But however long it may have been was just long enough for the thing that made that howl to come up the trail next to my tent. Suddenly I heard the crunching of claws on dirt and after that, claws on the rocks that made our camping plots. Then I saw the largest shadow made by a living creature that little kid me had ever seen. It lumbered heavily in the direction of the sparse tree line where I assume the other howling had come from. But before it got past the tree I urinated on it stopped. I realized only then that I was both lit like a candle and had not been trying to silence my heaving breathing. By then it was too late as that hulking thing lumbered over closer to the tree and into the light of my lantern. As dim as the little LED light was at that distance, it was just barely enough to make out details. I'd like to note a few very important details that stuck out to me as odd. It had roughly the fur coloring of a coyote, but that classic dogman head shape with the tiny pointed ears too small to make sense. It also made strange noises as it lowered to all fours in front of my tent. Popping sounds like joints rubbing together as I can only assume its knees busted out of their standing joints and fell into different joints to support all fours. It briefly ignored the very obviously frightened kid me in my tent as it sniffed the tree I had urinated on. The breaths were similar to a dog's, but longer and far deeper, almost like a horse's. Then that thing turned to me and stared straight into my eyes. Its eyes didn't glow, they didn't peer into my soul, but they were unbelievably unnatural. Above all the things I saw in those eyes, I saw a predator. Have you ever been in a position where you made eye contact with a beast you know is stronger than you? Something you know could just slaughter you, and you know it knows you know. Just looking for seemingly so damn long that I thought for sure I'd just be a bloody stain by the time anyone reached my tent. Screaming would do nothing. I doubted a gun would even hurt this thing. But despite every feeling in my gut, despite the dread of knowing it was predator and I was prey, I didn't die. Instead, it turned, slowly, ever so slowly, and just fucking sprinted off into the woods. Just fucking gone into the night faster than it came. I have one personal friend who knows and he jokes that made it was my piss on that tree. Like I marked my territory or something dumb like that. Or maybe it just wasn't hungry. Or most improbable, it had just enough morals to not kill a kid. I'll never really know. Needless to say, I didn't go to the bathroom. I just put my lantern away, closed my tent flap, and held it all night. I don't remember sleeping that night. I might have, I might not, but if I did, it was dreamless. I do remember that I tried to hide this experience the next day, asking if my friend and his family heard any howling. While they did hear the howling, they told me they just ignored it, thinking it was a coyote doing coyote stuff. I was encouraged to just ignore it as if I was a city kid who had never heard coyote howling before. That next day I stayed as close to my friend as possible while exploring and had nearly forgotten the encounter by lunch. Somehow the safety I had been feeling during the day put the beast out of my mind, until we found tracks in that super sandy place. Coyote tracks. I think seeing those tracks confirmed to me that it wasn't just some dream, and because of that I showed enough fear that night to convince my friend's family to let me sleep in their tent. Even in the comfort of a warmer tent, more people means more warmth, and in the presence of an adult, the father, and two other people, friend and his sister, I couldn't sleep that night. I'd nearly drift into sleep and then I'd hear a coyote howl. The next day I pretended to be sick and got my mother to drive up and take me home a day or two early. Worst camping trip of my life. It ruined not only my whole summer but also ruined camping. I haven't been camping without a tent buddy since, and I don't plan to. Even then I'm never comfortable, always listening for strange noises and acting paranoid. This really fucked me up, I guess, being forced to see that a human, top of the food chain, is utterly powerless in front of such a beast. Seriously, I don't think I can press hard enough to make everyone realize how powerless I felt. Even today when I think about this I remember two things first. Those eyes, and that feeling. Just writing this sent multiple shivers up my spine. That said, you might be asking why I'm talking about this again if it terrifies me so much. Simple. I both want answers, and I want to add to the conversation. I feel the need to add this encounter so that others can experience it, maybe contact me with questions, or answers. So let me say now that if you have any idea what happened that night, PLS respond or DM. If you have any questions, go ahead and do the same.